From the book of Esther, chapter 1, verses 1 through 9. This happened in the days of Ahasuerus, the same Ahasuerus who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his officials and ministers. The army of Persia and Media, and the nobles and the governors of the provinces were present, while he displayed the great wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and pomp of his majesty for many days, 180 days in all. When these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in the citadel of Susa, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings tied with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. Drinks were offered in golden goblets each of a different kind, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Drinking was by flagons, without restraint, for the king had given orders to all the officials of his palace to do as each one desired. Furthermore, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the palace of King Ahasuerus. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. The festival of Purim, or Lots, which this year in the Western calendar fell on Maundy Thursday, just last week. Purim is one of the non-Levitical feasts of the Jews, like Hanukkah. And since the book of Esther is written to advocate this feast and to be read at it, it's worth considering the ritual setting. Purim is a bit like Carnival or Mardi Gras. Not where you go for hushed tones and overtures of holiness. Rather, what you get in this celebration are games of role reversal. There's masquerade costumes. There is gift giving, giving of charity. And of course, there is plenty of drinking to go along with the celebration. In fact, Purim is the one feast at which the rabbis are prescribed not only to drink wine, but strong drink. So for the Sephardic Jews, that's vodka. For Ashkenazi, it's some kind of brandy. I don't know what we'll use here. We'll see what's down there when we get to snacks. But according to the Talmud, one should drink at Purim until one can no longer distinguish "Cursed be Haman" from "Blessed be Mordecai." And it's in the midst of this party that the Esther scroll is read. So all that to say, if as you listen to Ecclesiastes over the last few weeks, you thought that there were no exegetical difficulties there that Prozac couldn't cure, you should be aware that the traditional solvent for exegetical problems in Esther is vodka. Now, with that ritual setting in mind, and especially the masquerade element, we need to read this book that shares with the Song of Songs a curious distinction. It's in the Bible, but it never mentions God. And yet, God's activity, though hidden, isn't hidden that well. The mask of circumstance slips, and despite his attempts at anonymity, we see God in the coincidences as they pile up through the story. But that's to get ahead of the story. Today, we get chapter 1, and chapter 1 mostly sets up the character foils for the main events that follow. But even in this preparatory chapter, we find some important insights that the Jews gained through their diaspora experience. We, I think, would do well to learn from some of those insights as we enter into an increasingly post-Christian society ourselves. The Jews, as they lived scattered among pagan societies, saw lavish displays of wealth and power, and one could easily be intimidated or overawed, could be lured into superficial admiration, to yes-man relations to that sort of power. But if one looked closely, the Jews found, and here Esther helps us do this, there's a hollowness to pagan power. The pagan elite of the Persian Empire, as depicted here, live with a kind of vacuum of character. And so Ahasuerus, or Artaxerxes, as he's usually identified, ruled over a kingdom that stretched from east as far as North India and west Asia Minor and North Africa. He's immensely powerful, immensely wealthy. But here we see a portrait of an ostentatious king who lives for the impressions that he can make on other people. He doesn't have any inner strength. There's no stable character in this man. He constantly needs other people to make up his mind for him. And that's part of what the story turns for. He lives for and plays to the poles, we might say. And so the book of Esther is structured, appropriately enough, by a series of drinking parties. And here, Artaxerxes' vacuous character comes to the surface in the midst of these parties. And in these just 9 verses of chapter 1, we've already heard of 3 of them. Okay? It begins, this book, by relating a 6-month drinking bout for the nobles. 180 days. Evidently, Persian princes had remarkably resilient livers. But we're given by the language here in verse 4 to see the excess. I mean, it's supposed to draw our attention to it and make us laugh. I think it's satire, right? He displayed the great wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and the pomp of his majesty for many days. Well, following that feast, there's another one, just 7 days this time, in the capital, and it's for everybody, the common folk, from the least to the greatest are invited. And this is the king's chance to show off. He's given the nobles their party, and he wants to make sure that the common folk see just how impressive he is. Again, you see that his only rush seems to come from shocking and wowing people. And so you get this description of the ornaments around the court, and then in verse 7, that the drinks were served in golden goblets, and each one was different from the other. Okay? Just kind of showing off for the common folk. The drinking was by the flagon, no restraint. The king said, give them as much as they want. Okay? Meanwhile, here at the end of this, you get a little side note that Queen Vashti gives a banquet of her own for the ladies. And there's no excess, there's no flamboyance, it's just a banquet. The only people in this story with a lick of sense are the women and the Jews, it turns out. Okay? Well, on the 7th day, when the king and all the men in the capital city are sloshed, Artaxerxes sends for Queen Vashti. He's been showing off all his other possessions. Now it's time to show off, his trophy wife. And so in verse 11, he orders her to be brought to him because it says she was fair to behold. Rabbinic tradition says here that in verse 11 it says, Queen Vashti has been ordered to before the king wearing the royal crown in order to show the peoples and the officials her beauty, for she was fair to behold. Well, rabbinic tradition says that this wearing the crown is wearing only the crown, right? He's, he's 7 days into the cups and not making good decisions here. Well, then comes the real shocker. I mean, who could have predicted this? Queen Vashti refuses, right? You mean come parade myself before this drunken mob? No thanks. I'll stay home. I got to wash my hair. Now, Artaxerxes lives for the impression he can make on people, and so he's just been publicly humiliated. He was expecting to be able to kind of strike another pose and wow somebody. And so here in verse 12, we're told that the king is enraged and his anger burned within him. And now you see how silly the story gets, because here basically Artaxerxes has a domestic issue. He can't control his wife. And so he turns it into a matter of state. Right? He calls the advisors, he calls, quote, the sages who knew the laws. It's like the equivalent of the Supreme Court. And he calls them together and says, what am I going to do? Can't do anything with my wife. She won't do what I say. Right? And the sages turn out to be just about as intelligent as their king. And so in verses 16 through 17, you get this advice. It says, not only has Queen Vashti done wrong to the king, but also to all the officials and all the peoples who are in the province of King Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen will be made known to all women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands, since they'll say King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she didn't come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will rebel against the king's officials, and there'll be no end of contempt and wrath. It's a national crisis, O king. We're an inch away from roving mobs of bra burners. You've got to quell the uprising, and you've got to do it quick. Right? That is the official advice. Well, so what do you do? This is the Supreme Court's resolution. This is how they will restore order to society. Verses 19 through 20. If it pleases the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be altered, that Vashti is never to come before King Ahasuerus. Which, of course, she'll be really distraught over, since that's what she's in trouble for doing. But anyhow, and let the king give her royal position to another who's better than she. And so when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, vast as it is, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. Yeah, that's going to work. And so, by the end of chapter 1, order has been restored to society. We find that letters go out from to all the royal provinces, each in his own script, to every people according to their language. And now in every land, under a magnet on the refrigerator, there is a letter from the king declaring that every man, quote, should be master in his own house. Problem solved. That's chapter 1. Others will have to take you further. Now, I know as you read this, you have suspicions about the plausibility of this account. I can see it on your face, and I share them. Amid the cultivated decorum and civility of political discourse in 2016, it's hard to imagine that a pompous, vacuous character could end up ruling an empire. I mean, how could that happen? Nobody in our day would be taken in by a lavishly wealthy older man parading a younger, beautiful wife as a trophy, who's stretched with machismo, blusters about public policy, and exudes anger in public discourse. Such a thing just couldn't happen in our day. And if it weren't in the Bible, I wouldn't believe it about their day either. It's kind of unthinkable. But we're not here to talk about the world outside. We're here as those who are preparing and, recharging for the ministries to which we've been called. And so what word is there in Esther chapter 1 for us? Well, I think that the primary use that we could find here is as a cautionary tale about character and leadership. And, here at seminary, we offer courses that are designed to offer those kind of a higher skill set that's needed for reading a text well, for thinking through theological issues, for guiding a congregation. But there's one thing that we can't deliver at seminary. It just isn't the sort of thing that can fit in a curriculum, and that's character. And my observation is that ministries, when they fail, when they really bomb, it tends to be not because there was a higher skill set missing, but because there's a lack of character. It's been my sorrow over the years to see a number of ministers fall, as we say, to see that character vacuum come to the surface and what that does to the congregations in which they're serving. And so as we look back at the kind of the ridiculous behavior of King Artaxerxes and his court, and we see the hollowness of pagan power, our call is to, as it were, move in the opposite direction, to find that character, that inner strength shaped into the likeness of Christ that allows us to go on serving in the roles to which God has called us. And so may we this day serve with character and integrity and stamina in the places to which God has called us. Thank you.